Hello, everybody. It's been a long time since I've made a video. As a matter of fact, this story starts out in 2021, which is, I think, about the same time I made my last video. So that's 3 years ago. I mentioned at the beginning of this year that I was going to start working on a new book, and I have. I have about 150 pages written, and I would say it's probably maybe 2/3 of the way through, maybe a little over half, I don't know, depends. Anyway, I've been having a little fun with my page, showing pictures of me with people who've passed away. I thought to myself I was hitting a bit of a lull, and I needed some inspiration, and I thought to myself, wouldn't it be fun if I could talk to some of these folks, people who either I admired their work or admired them for some other reason, and just hear what they had to say. So I put some pictures up, and I was just having some fun. But I figure it's time to maybe get down to business here, and I'll start sharing with you some of my story. So this story is called Stones of Abraham. And the title is taken from a verse of scripture from the Bible, where St. John the Baptist says to the Pharisees and all of the naysayers that come out to see him, you call yourself children of Abraham, but God could take from these very stones and create children of Abraham. And in that context, of course, this is the Jewish culture of the first century, but it's true, I think, of any people who considers themselves devout or special. God doesn't need us, and God could take these very stones and create whatever, His church, His faithful group of people, and that's kind of the groundwork for the story. So the story begins actually in Denver, Colorado, and it's after a baseball game. They're just coming out of the pandemic, and they're starting to have live baseball again. And the main character is a fellow named Bobby Rukeyser, and he goes to the baseball game, the Colorado Rockies, with his friend of his who's visiting from out of town. And the game is over, and the Rockies lost, and they're having a beer before they go their separate ways. And that's how the story begins. So it's Friday, July 16th, 2021. Bobby Rukeyser sat with his friend Glenn Juergens at Denver's Blake Street Tavern. The Colorado Rockies had just lost the first game in their first home series after the All-Star break. A crushing 10-4 loss to the LA Dodgers. The tavern was only half full. Normally would have been packed after a game, win or lose. The COVID-19 pandemic was in retreat. Vaccines had been available for over 6 months, but it wasn't quite over. Some folks were still wearing masks, pulling them down to take a drink or a bite of food. Bobby and Glenn lamented the loss over a few beers before they both headed their separate ways to go home. Glenn to the airport and on to California, and Bobby back to his mom's house near Washington Park. "So you're really hell-bent on this PhD thing, huh?" asked Glenn. "You could always come to work for Google. They'd hire you in a heartbeat." Bobby took a swig of beer, then set down the bottle. He looked around at the other patrons, all wallowing in the Rockies' loss. He smiled and then said to his friend, "You know, I figure there'll always be Google and Meta and Microsoft and whoever else is looking for another young programmer to do their bidding. The PhD gives me a few more years to be me, to pursue my own vision, to do my own bidding." Glenn stared at Bobby, waiting for more. "I have ideas," said Bobby. "I'm close to perfecting this avatar thing. If I go to work for some balls-to-the-walls tech company, there'll be no time to work on my own ideas." "I get it," said Glenn. So have you got things figured out yet, what you're going to do in California when you land? I have a place I'm going to sublet, said Bobby. It's an apartment that belongs to a professor who's going to teach abroad for a semester. My advisor at Stanford put me in touch with her. Considering the cost of housing out there, the rent seemed very fair. The problem is it doesn't become available until October, and I need to be out there in the beginning of September. So what are you going to do? Said Glenn. I'm going to stay with my aunt and uncle for a few weeks. They live in Santa Clara. You know you could stay with me and Dave, said Glenn. Thanks, said Bobby. I'll be okay. It'll give me a chance to reconnect with my uncle. We actually used to be kind of close. Cool. Well, it sounds like you've got it all worked out then, said Glenn, who slyly grinned. Here, he said, and then he reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a pack of cigarettes. He slid the pack across the table. What's this? Asked Bobby. You don't smoke, do you? I'm giving it up. Bobby gave Glenn a questioning look. It's something you said you'd like to get your hands on, both the data architecture and the algorithm. Bobby took the pack and opened it up. Inside was a small storage drive. The discernment program? Asked Bobby. You're kidding. It's the latest version. You got all that on this? Asked Bobby. Glenn just smiled and gave Bobby a nod. Bobby put the drive back in the cigarette box. You know you don't owe me anymore, said Bobby. You don't have to do this. I would not be where I am today if it weren't for you, my friend. Besides, some of the code from that project we did as seniors contributed to this. So you've had a hand in developing this just as much as any of the Googlers. You're entitled. You could get fired, said Bobby. Like you said, there'll always be another Google, or Meta, or Microsoft looking for young programmers. The two sat silently for a while. Then Glenn said, Well, I better get going. I've got a plane to catch. Let's meet up when you get to California.